It's an Archaeo Death interview with Professor Howard Williams and his guest.
Archaeo Deathlings, welcome to an Archaeo Death interview with myself, Professor Howard Williams, and my extra special TikToking guest, Steph. Steph, welcome. It's wonderful to meet you finally. And could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, so my name's Steph, and I'm a current second year PhD student at Durham University, and I specialize in the Iron Age of Southeast Arabia.
Well, exactly, and I do want to give you an opportunity to discuss your thesis as part of this, because I know talking about a thesis can be really stressful. Just but I do really want, because amongst the other things that you do on social media, I really want to learn about your thesis, and particularly as all these videos together are serving as a kind of showcase of being a early career researcher. Obviously, I'll be interviewing some sort of pretty established people as well, but I think it's really important if people learn, what you're doing, but how did you get to be a PhD student? So that's really my first question: is how did you become you? Where did you come from? How did you get into archaeology? What made this happen, Steph?
I mean, that isn't that the $1,000,000 question? So I was just talking to my sister. No, I was like literally on the call with my sister yesterday, and she was like, "You know what was really confusing, Stephanie, when you decided to become an archaeologist? Because it just came out of nowhere. And I was like, yeah, I kind of did. I think, as we all are at 17, when parents are trying to offer useful, helpful advice, and they're like, what do you want to do for your career? And you're like, don't you dare talk to me. How dare you ask me any questions? And then I've never been a languages person, and I've always been interested in history. So I've been looking at maybe doing an ancient history degree. But all of them were requiring you to learn either Latin or Greek, or Egyptian if you were going to go down the Egyptology, but I knew that wouldn't be for me. And I was just like, I really don't want to have to learn Latin or Greek, I'm going to be honest. And then I saw that there was a new degree offered at Macquarie Uni in Sydney for archaeology. And I went, oh, when I was 8, I wanted to be an archaeologist. All right, I'll go and do archaeology. And that's like, as I always get asked, like, oh, like how much preparation did you do before applications? Did you think about this deeply? I'm like, no, it was like a 20-minute thought. Like I literally was scrolling and went, oh, yeah, this looks okay. Why not go for it?
So I think that's really honest and really clear, and actually it contrasts with a lot of the other responses I hear, which is this kind of, I remember age 2 when I first encountered whatever it may be, and I thought to myself one day. No, but I mean, at some people it is an early age thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, we get these interests in various things as kids, but deciding to then go and pursue them age 17 is a different ball game. So so it was a bit of an experiment. You weren't sure what to expect. What happened then? You did the undergraduate degree in Sydney and then straight on?
No, so I decided that, well, I kind of didn't know what to do. There wasn't really a lot of, because it was such a new degree, and this is my recommendation, never ever be part of the first cohort for a degree, because no one, yourself, nor the lecturers or the department or the university know what they're doing. So I recommend you wait, if you want to go for a degree, either go to a more established program or wait a few years, like give it time to mature. Yeah, it was a bit, I mean, it was a fun experience, but no, I kind of finished the degree and I knew I wanted to do postgrad, but I just really didn't know what I wanted to do research in. Like I could have gone straight into a master's by research degree. It would have even been funded, but I was just like, I wanted more opportunities. And I thought, why not go to the UK? Because my mum's a dual citizen. Well, she's a citizen of the UK, so I'm a citizen of the UK. And I was like, well, it's an easy way of moving overseas and studying abroad without having to do that. And I worked in a boarding school for a year randomly.
Yes.
Which was, I always say that. People are like, so what did you do after your degree? I'm like, well, I would have worked in a boarding school. But I then had the opportunity to go and excavate in Dubai in January of 2019, and I fell in love with Arabia. I kind of fell in love with the desert. And then I was working in commercial archaeology in the UK. And then in March of 2020, I went back home to Australia for a 5-week holiday. And I did not return to the UK until it was time to start my master's in September 21 because of COVID. that sort of put things on hold, shall we say, a little bit.
And so you're into the PhD now.
Yes.
And what's that about? I mean, obviously Arabia, the Iron Age, but I know nothing about the Iron Age of Arabia, but beyond the fact that the Iron Age means different things everywhere in the world. So really, I know I'm supposed to be a professor of archaeology, literally presume no knowledge, because, apart from the fact I know where Arabia is and I kind of guess where the Iron Age is, I don't know anything.
Yeah, no, I mean, in the broadest sense, when I'm talking, and this is the broadest sense, no Arabian archaeologists come for me. The Iron Age that we're looking at is kind of from 1300 BCE to kind of either 600 or 300 BCE, depending who you talk to.
Okay.
Yeah, and it also, so the area I'm looking at, like Southeast Arabia, I mean, my research is specifically on sites that are in Oman, but it also encompasses the Emirates. And so obviously, because why would anyone agree on anything? There is a little difference between how the dating's done in the Emirates versus Oman. So
Okay.
it's just, again, but in the broadest sense, that's the dating. And essentially, the big thing that happened during this period is that there's a lot of settlement intensification compared to the Bronze Age. And so what I'm studying is one Wadi Valley where kind of we have 15 settlements that emerge and then they disappear, or they stop being inhabited essentially. And I'm going, ta-da, here are these settlements. This is weird. Why? Why are these settlements here? Why this location? Why 15 little settlements and not one big one like there kind of was during the Bronze Age? So yeah, that's basically what the PhD is.
Fascinating. And do we know, I mean, this is away from the big Southwest Asian empires, but obviously becomes in later centuries pivotal to
Yes.
the end of those empires. But but what do we know about these societies? Are they connected by trade and exchange with those more, I hate to use these, but central areas? These more well-known, shall we say, ancient civilizations of the Bronze Age, Iron Age, or are they sort of doing their own thing? In the
I feel like it's maybe a little bit of both, at least as far as I understand it from my literature review. That's what it is, kind of more of that mixture that I mean, during the Bronze Age, there is a lot more with trade. There's a lot of copper coming up from this region, going up to Mesopotamia, like that's a big thing. And then there's a bit of trade also during the Iron Age from like closer to Yemen, because that's where you have a lot of the trade in incense that's going to Egypt and up into Mesopotamia. Right. So you kind of have that going on. But the Iron Age is interesting in my area because there's a lot of localization. So there is some links possibly with what's now Iran. There's some similar pottery styles, but even those, they do appear to be maybe taking inspiration from international like styles, but they are very local. So that's this is what we have. It kind of goes from in the Bronze Age being not as maybe big in its own way, but very connected to kind of around, I guess you could say, the Bronze Age collapse. You then kind of have this kick up where you get this localization here for some reason.
So what do we know about these settlement sites? Have they been excavated? Are they really from sort of the sort of aerial reconnaissance and lidar and that type of thing? And what do we know?
So basically, these sites weren't previously known before this survey happened. So I'm looking at the results. It was called the Rostak-Bartner Archaeological Survey. It ran for 5 years. And so I'm looking at the results of that survey. And when they went out to look at it, they didn't know what they'd find. This area was a little bit of a blank spot archaeologically. There'd been a lot of research in other areas, but the area, it's called the Bartner Coast, was a bit blank at that time, back in 2013. So they were like, let's do a survey. And they kind of stumbled across this Iron Age landscape. They weren't even particularly looking for Iron Age. I think they were looking for a different, like a later period entirely. So there has been excavations of one of the sites, but it's a big Bronze Age one. So that's had a 3-year project excavating. So I went in January of this year for 1 week to Oman. And there was an excavation started on one of the settlements, but then that relates to what we kind of want to discuss here about death, because most of the settlements post-abandonment were reused for tombs and graves that now sort of cover the surface. So what we excavated was, well, I excavated one grave that they left me because I was only there for a week. So that was quite nice.
So you've been, your primary focus of your doctoral research is settlement archaeology,
Yes.
but this in your field work as a and your learning as a student, you've obviously been exposed to the archaeology of death. And while I've had people on here talking about their field work and their research based on synthesizing other people's work, it'd be really good to get a sense of how this worked for you. How did this encounter with mortality starts, because all archaeology students deal with it. So I occasionally have students join our masters. We have an MA program in the archaeology of death and memory. I occasionally have students who go, well, the reason I'm doing this is because I managed through circumstance or happenstance to never engage with anything to do with burial archaeology as an undergraduate. And I'm always taken aback by that. I go, how can you avoid it? But I just love to hear your perspective, particularly from the Australian system coming to the UK.
I mean, I mean, it has been, 10 years since I started my undergrad, so maybe things have changed, but at least when I started, there wasn't really any excavations in Australia. We were kind of told point blank, if we wanted to do any work, it had to be overseas. And again, and that's because we've got, I mean, a bunch of things, but very strong unions. And also we have obviously still living First Nations Australians. They're still very heavily involved in the archaeology. And I think I do know of some students that worked in more of the colonial side, the post-contact archaeology with the European stuff. But because I didn't really know what I want to do during my undergrad, like as I said, I went into doing an archaeology degree very much just like, oh, I'm like interested in history. It wasn't like I had a particular thing, oh, I want to study. And in my mind, I was like, oh, to make myself as employable as possible, I'll get a little bit of experience in a lot of things. So I found a field school in Poland that was a mortuary field school because I was like, I've never done anything with bones. And I was like, why not? Let's learn how to excavate human remains, essentially. So that was my first experience. And I did wonder going out there because I was like, what if I freak out? What if I go to this site and I see my first skeleton and I don't know, I have a crack. I have like some kind of breakdown emotionally. I didn't at all.
No.
I found it incredibly fascinating. It was very, very interesting. And I'll always respect that field school for really instilling in me having respect for the dead. Because I feel like something I see a lot online when people are like, oh, archaeologists, you're all digging up human remains, which I'm like, well, if you wanted to avoid them, you could. Like, you can, I mean, like, I can very easily avoid ever excavating another skeleton if I wanted to.
Yes.
But I do think, to me, it's something that's always been instilled anytime I've worked with human remains, is having respect. Like, you respect the individual, respect who they were. But yeah, so that was my first. And then I went and was a student and then later a supervisor of an excavation of a sort of Roman late antiquity cemetery in Menorca at the site of Santa Sera. That was very interesting.
Oh, wow.
That those were a lot of commingled remains, while in Poland it had been kind of single burials in this, because it was right next to a basilica where people would come from healing. Obviously, not everyone actually gets healed. So you had quite complex burials covered in Roman concrete that had seeped in, and then like the ground in Menorca, if you've ever tried digging on one of those islands, I don't recommend it because it's just so dry and rocky and you're trying to like get little dry fragments of bone out of this really hard dirt and concrete mix, and great experience. But yeah.
So you had quite a lot of field experience of digging up the dead in different soils, different funerary rituals, different commingling coming from the fact people are disturbing the early graves, and that's really good experience. So when you sort of entered into your social media world, which of course you are, like it or not, I am going to characterize you as one of the main faces of archaeology on at least TikTok and certainly other social media. You are, you've got 229,000 plus followers. You've got was it 29 million likes on of
Yeah,
your...
I just hit. Yeah, 29
really?
million likes. Yeah,
I mean,
literally.
that is just absolutely astounding, achievement. And it's labor, it's work, it's thought, it's design, it's strategy, it's real, it's academic intellectual work. And I think people forget that so I think it's really important to both recognize that and just to celebrate that, but from that perspective, you're dealing with a lot of topics. I was trying to jot down how I would characterize you, and I don't know if you want me to do that, say anything, but I'd love to hear what you think your content's main foci are, because there's other archaeology creators, we all do different mixes of things. But what do you feel, and particularly the burial or mortuary elements, but in general terms, to start with, how would you characterize your social media?
Oh, I feel like that's a question I've never really been asked, and I feel like it's something that I'm still trying to work out for myself, to be honest. I don't know, maybe I feel like it's like emotional archaeology. Like for me, I feel that that's a thread that no matter really what I do, I'm seeking to find an emotion and a connection. And perhaps it's a little over dramatic, but you know what? I did do drama as a child. I think I'm allowed to be a little bit performative and that online, have that expression. But yeah, for me, because as a child, what connected me to history was stories. Like that's the way I was taught, because I was homeschooled growing up. So it was my mother teaching me history. So we were always reading books, like different historical fiction, and even the quote unquote textbooks I had was literally stories. And my mum would make jokes like, if you have a name, something like Nebuchadnezzar, and she'd be like, oh, can you imagine Nebuchadnezzar being like a little kid and being told to eat his porridge or something? So growing up, I was shown history, and I think unintentionally through my mum. It was just my mum trying to teach history, was in a very, these people are real. They're not this Nebuchadnezzar, da da da, these amazing kings of mythology in some ways, that once he would have been a little boy being told to eat his breakfast, kind of thing. And that was something I don't think I was conscious of when I first started doing archaeology, nor when I graduated with my undergrad. And that to me became apparent once I started making content, because I was like, I create the content that I would want to see. Because when I started my first archaeology posting in October of 2019, I went back and I checked because I was curious. I was like, when did I actually start posting about archaeology? And it's literally the first video. And I was putting out what I wanted, because I felt like, at least at that time, a lot of what I was seeing on social media was either ancient aliens or a lot of like people who didn't necessarily have an archaeological background but had an interest and were posting about it. And I was like, oh, well, if they're posting about it, then maybe I can. I can share what I like. And what I like about history is the stories, is the humanity of the past. The fact that, yeah, we have these amazing events happening, but people in probably 500 years are going to look back at us and be like, oh my gosh, these huge things that were happening. So yeah, that's what I'm always seeking to do, I guess.
That does make sense. Now you've characterized it that way. And the way I was going to crudely, in terms of subject matter, was going to say women, food, death were the things that I came up. So I think you've done hardly surprising, a much more eloquent and refined.
I mean, you're not wrong. You're not wrong for your one. Yeah.
But I mean, I thought I didn't mean that in any way dismissive. I meant that in a positive thing. That you talk a lot about women's experience. You talk a lot about food and the quotidian, the daily. The common person. But particularly, I thought food was a theme that I know you have passions for in other ways, and that comes in. I remember some of your lies with cooking. I think I watched and various sort of.
Yeah.
But then also death is a theme, and I thought you've got a lot of content that's about almost lamentation, archaeology and affection. I felt very much that you of course it's a performance, and I suppose there's always someone that takes everything we do literally online, and that if and that my opinion is, I generally did, I'm as angry as I pretend to be, or as enthusiastic as I could. And I just sit there going afterwards, going, but obviously, but you do talk about affection in the past, people's love for each other, and care for each other, and loss of each other. But you also position yourself as the person experiencing this connection to the past, and not just with graves, but also I've noticed, you know, when you go around buildings, when you're dealing with settlements, with material culture. And so I think the lamentation was the word I fixed on, because it links how you see yourself as a person today encountering, and then imagining these people's lives and how they deal with it. I mean, is that unfair, or
no?
I mean, do you recognise that characterization on?
Yeah, I feel like you're saying this, and I'm like, oh yeah, it is like a lamentation in like that. That is not even in a way. That is kind of quite literally what is happening there. And yeah, you're right. Not just necessarily just the graves, or even just any like written records that I found and stuff, but also just being in the buildings. Like you're just feeling that emotion. Especially I've been trying to be a little bit more adventurous up here in the Northeast and visit more sites, which I've been very much enjoying, and getting braver at creating content out in public, which is terrifying.
It's difficult, isn't it? People don't both that sense of being watched, and also what do people want from this site, you know, because it's yeah. I'd love to hear how you've been feeling about it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I feel like, again, it's always searching for that human connection. That's what I love about the past. Again, it's that thing about stories. I want to know about the people. Like, sure, you can look at a building and it's like, yeah, you can, like, you know, look at this architectural style. It was built in this year and then it was knocked down here, and then you can see an extension here, and you're like, okay. But, like, what does that mean? The fact that there's a castle that, you know, they built the keep in, like, 1150, and then in 1200 they add an extension for bedrooms. Okay, but like why do they want, like, did they not originally build bedrooms? Did they suddenly go, oh, we need like more bedrooms? Like what is the story to me behind that? And you know, we'll never know. That's, I think, part of almost that lamentation in archaeology is something I feel that makes me a better archaeologist, or at least I hope it makes me a better archaeologist. Just having the humanity of the past and what's going on in the forefront, and thinking about the people, because to me there should be a purpose in art. There should be a purpose in everything you do. Therefore, there has to be a purpose in archaeology. Like, why am I an archaeologist? Why am I doing this? Who am I hoping to serve? And yes, there can be a lot of stuff that you do with modern populations and like the living history and that kind of connection. But I also think, to me, it's some kind of recognition of the past. Because I see a lot of stuff in people, at least it's something, a recurring theme I see sometimes in my comments is people saying, oh, I feel really sad that people get forgotten. And I'm like, but do people, like, you know, there was someone who was like, oh, I walk down the same streets, I look at the same buildings people did like 500 years ago, but like they're completely forgotten. I'll be forgotten. And I'm like, but in you doing that, they live on. Like they're still living in a way. You continuing to do the same things continues that, you know, and that's why when I unintentionally started the quote unquote ancestors trend, that was purely because I was like, I wanted to create a connection to Neanderthals eating crabs in Portugal. And I was like, well, people still eat crabs in Portugal nowadays. I've eaten crabs like that. You know, yes, we don't know technically who we are, but like I have a way of relating to those people, that I have a connection in that little way. In even though if we were to meet, there's no way we'd be able to communicate. You know, we would have nothing. You'd sort of be there, but we could both sit down on a beach, or in, I guess technically it was like a cave or whatever, but you know, we could both sit down and eat crabs, and it would probably be delicious, or at least I hope it would be. I don't know.
You explain for a person who hasn't seen that trend what that exactly involves, because I know you've done many different types of style, but that would be a really good example, I think.
Yeah, I feel like it was kind of a culmination of the sort of build up of like whatever my style was, and it was basically the idea of having a conversation. So there's like both characters played by me, technically, so there are like two characters, and it's like normally how it would go is it would be like someone in like nowadays like doing something, so like eating crabs or eating bread dipped in olive oil and balsamic vinegar or something.
Yeah.
And then the camera would switch, and I'd go from this side, and then I would pause it, and then I'd go like this. Like that was a technicality of the character change. And so on this side it'd be like someone from the past, like someone, I don't know, 1,000 years ago going, oh my gosh, do you like that? Or is this something that you enjoy doing? And then it swaps back to the other person, the other character, and they're like, oh yeah, you know, I love eating bread dipped in olive oil. And the person's like, yeah, me too. And like, that's it. It's like the most simple thing you could do. But yeah,
you're not going, I mean, while others have done this with who are reenactors and cosplayers and you're not trying to, you're expecting people to have the cognitive ability to realize that this is a bit of acting. This isn't, you're not suddenly dressing up in or putting, you know, backgrounds or anything. It's simply a cheap, simple, quick, rhetorical, well, formative way of helping people think about the connection between the research we do and what we find out about the past and modern day people. Is that a fair thing?
Yeah, I know. I feel like I like to have a lot of faith in the ability of my audience or people who come across my content to, you know, have that understanding of it. And that's, I think sometimes keeping the formulas simple works. Because also, I just simply don't have the. I wish I could do like reenactment stuff. I just simply don't have the skills for it. So the most I can do is go like from here to here. That's the most. That's what we're doing.
And I must also say, I think an important element of this is, at least, correct me if I'm wrong or qualify me, but I have noticed, of course, you don't always do it, but you do. Obviously, you're packing in multiple layers of choice of audio, choice of theme for very short, catchy videos. But then if someone asks a salient question, they don't get it, you do a follow-up, don't you? Like, you know, you did one just now recently about the Stonehenge Visitor Centre reconstruction of the early Neolithic sort of beardy guy, and someone said, you've got to show us this. You did it without, you know, if you know type thing. But if people say, please tell us what you're talking about, and then you do show it. So if people follow you, they will learn more than just that soundbite. Is that a fair way of saying it?
Yeah, I think again that's something I've been working on, because I did start this like especially when I first started this social media, it was just because I was bored. I was working in Oxford in commercial archaeology and I was bored, and I went, let's download this app TikTok I've heard about. And then I just started posting, and so I felt like I definitely feel like I've fought against this idea of being professional. Like for a long time, I wasn't putting any like references into stuff, but the thing I always did was make sure that from the text I'd have in my video, you could always Google it. You could always put into Google and get a Wikipedia page. Like it was accessible, but I was just like, look, I know I'll forget to put in references, and I kind of didn't want that responsibility. But then I feel like as this has progressed, I've gone, you know what, Steph, if you want to ethically, I think, continue being in this space and creating this content, you have to put something in. You know, you can't just post a video and put literally nothing. So I'm not perfect. I definitely still forget sometimes, but I'm trying to be better about at least putting, like, often I'll post about like archaeological news, and if it's got a backing in a paper, I'll cite the paper. Because I mean, I always like to anyway, like if it's just news, but I'll just like double check what the literature actually says, just because you never know, sometimes a news article can like latch onto one point, and then I'll read it and go, oh, but that's not actually what the authors are saying. So I was just like, you know, I just like to double check things.
And can I follow up on this point of, you know, not everything you said is to do with burial archaeology, but you know, graves do feature quite repeatedly in your emotional archaeology, your lamentations on the past, as it were, where you're sort of, you know, you're shown as the person reflecting on this, so you're shown as the subject who is thinking about what it must have been like to say goodbye to a loved one, or leave a memorial to a loved one in the past, or be buried together, and those kind of issues. But you, not only with that, but in other ways, you have been an influencer, because your style has influenced a range of other creators. And I wonder if because you're doing your own, you've got your own profile, but there's quite an orbit of other, though it's not that many of us actually, from what I mean, maybe I've just not missed out, but of those that do it, I think you've been really influential. Would you be able to reflect on that in terms of how you've been, you know, setting the trends?
I mean, yeah, again, I feel like just as I've been inspired by other creators and like peers in this space, it's only natural that you're going to be influencing in some respect. If it's a natural thing, if people see a certain style of video is popular, they're going to copy it, they're going to emulate it, they're going to reinterpret it into their own content in their own ways, in that way. Yeah, no, I think it's been really nice because kind of the reason I started posting on TikTok was because I was like, because I remember distinctly going, oh, I could never post about like archaeology. That's so niche. No one will care. No one will be interested in that. And then I started noticing accounts that were, and I was like, oh, it's not like maybe it wouldn't be accurate, or there was a lot of ancient alien stuff. And it was kind of in response to that I was like, oh no, I'm going to start actually making some content, or at least start making videos. And then eventually my account became 100% archaeology, like as the postings happened. But so it's been really nice to see this growth in the platform and to see now so many other like academics, because I feel like it's very easy for a niche like archaeology to be full of people who are like still they're very knowledgeable, but they're hobbyists, if that makes sense. Like they might like absolutely know their niche and know and like have the research, like but not have as many academics. And I think it's useful for those two groups to be complementary, like to have the hobbyists who are like, yes, you don't need to have gone to university to have an interest or to be knowledgeable on a topic, but also if you want the more academic side of things, you can also access that. So having the range of creators who then appeal to different audiences as well, I think is incredibly beneficial. Because like I'm well aware, like my content, I've been told repeatedly that my content is not people's favorites. And why do I always look so I get all the time so many times people are like, oh my gosh, you're so miserable. I think people actually believe that I never smile.
I get told off when I smile. Apparently, it's smug and self-satisfied and everything. You can't win, can you? If you actually look happy for once about something or laughing at something, look at him, academic, smiling. I get these angry comments, like thinks he knows it all with his smile, and I go, oh, okay.
Like, I don't know, am I meant to just sit here and like factually tell you anything? Like, I don't know. But like, it's fine if you're not a fan of the style of content I do. There's like a bunch of other people whose content is quite different to me, but whose stuff I enjoy, and maybe you will as well. Yeah, it's just, but that's the joys of the internet.
Whether you admit it or not, I think you've been very influential and something I've learned a lot off you. Although I've often, as much as anything, to go, God, that really worked, but I don't think I could do that, but I really appreciated it. And then sometimes going, oh, I couldn't do something with that, but that makes me think, because I'm thinking about content too, and I'm thinking, that does something, but that would just look lame if I did it, but it works for, but then we're all trying to think through different options. And that leads me to ask another question, which I hadn't planned, but it links to the final question, just to warn you, is going to be about the more controversial looting, trading issues, if I can touch. But before that, before that, I want to ask about, it sounds like, and I hadn't thought about this before, but let me put it this way. It sounds like you're like me in the sense that I find it easier. I'm more comfortable not talking about my absolute specialty. Like I find it much more liberating to go, here's a new paper on Bronze Age burials in Hungary, which I know jack shit about, but now I do. Let me reflect from my expertise on that, rather than actually talking about things I'm writing about, researching, publishing on, which I find a bit boring, but also I kind of said it. I don't really want to say it again on camera. And it sounds like you're not, so to put that onto you, you're not like doing loads of videos on Iron Age Arabia, or because it's a bit weird. You're still working on it, or you just worked on it and it feels weird and uncomfortable, and is that a fair point, or do you disagree?
No, I mean, I think I struggle. I mean, there's a couple of reasons. I try and post a little bit, but there's only so many jokes about camel domestication you can make until you're like, okay, I made enough. I tried to make a playlist, and I was like, Steph, it's all jokes about camel domestication. Like, you just can't have a playlist. I'm just like, guys, they domesticated. You can't do that. I think a lot of my issue is because there's not a whole bunch of what I would consider, or I haven't found yet, accessible literature. So as I said, I like to make anything that I post about easily searchable. Like it's in some way accessible to just anyone off the street who's like, oh, that sounds interesting. I want to learn more. They can whack it into Google and they could find reputable sources. There just isn't that. Like, if you want academic sources, I can absolutely recommend to you like tombstone volumes on the archaeology of Southeast Arabia if you want to know what the Danish were doing in the 50s in Bahrain. But if you're just like, oh, who are the people living there? I'm like, great question. That's a great question. That's such a good question. Like, why were the settlements there? Great question. That's such a good question. So, and I struggled because I have this fear that it feels like there's more pressure when you, like, if you want to position yourself as an expert in something. If you're like, people are like, oh, what's your area of expertise? And I'm like, oh, I don't have any. Like, why are you asking me that?
Yeah.
And I had someone be like, oh, well, it's obviously Arabian. I was like, but I know nothing. I feel like the more I read, the less I learn. And so I'm like, I don't want to position myself online as, oh, well, she's an expert. And then I say something wrong. And then because archaeology is a small world. Arabian archaeology is a smaller world. Southeast Arabia is even a more tiny world. And I'm like, what if I say something and get this terrible reputation? And they're all like, oh, she's a terrible academic. We can't hire her because I said something wrong.
Well, I mean, this is the problem, isn't it? Is that we are all worried about what other people think, and I've had a number of people say to me, "You shouldn't be worried. Just do what you do." And I think, but I should be worried because I'm worried that people won't hire me so much as, we are doing this for audiences, and we do want to have feedback, and and I know that in my TikToks are sitting there without any videos, any comments. I know there are leading experts in my field watching. And I know that because I'll give you an example. Recently, I did a video about Pacific archaeology, and I got it wrong in the sense that I was only up to date as far as 2018. And someone rocked up in my comments and said, really helpfully, said, "You need to read the 2021 paper showing this." And I went, "Oh," and I did a follow-up couple of videos saying, "Yeah, I was kind of right, but not," and here's some new research. And then in another comment, they admitted they are not only an author of one of the research papers, but also the editor of one of the journals of Pacific Polynesian archaeology. And so they are literally sitting there, my comments, dormant for years, and suddenly I do a video on something, and they're like, "Oh, actually," but in a nice way, not in a, and that's really constructive. But I like that, but also I can't like fob it off and go, "Oh no, it doesn't matter. I said what I said." You've got to go, okay. Now I know more. I'm learning as I go, and I think that's really constructive. But yeah, doing exactly your own niche can be a bit of a chore. It almost ruins the fun of it, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's like when I spend all day, like, I'm on my analysis at the moment. I'm trying to put down every thought I have about my settlements. Anything I'm thinking, I'm just like writing into this big, massive document that I will eventually edit, I suppose, at some point. But when I do that, and when I'm like, oh, I want to make a TikTok video, I'm like, oh, but I want to make it on something that's fun. Like, oh, there's this cool new find that's been found or something, something interesting, like the pottery that was found in Australia.
I didn't know anything about that, Steph. That was educational for me. That was amazing. Is that?
I mean, I didn't know anything. I didn't click, and then when they said, "Oh, there's never been like pottery found in Australia before," I was there like, "Oh yeah." I feel like, here's the thing that sidebar about my undergrad that I was kind of sad about is that we didn't do any Indigenous archaeology at all. So I got a whole degree in Australia, and I know nothing about Australian archaeology. Which is just a sidebar about the way universities and degrees are structured and the love people have for Rome and Egypt and Greece. And yeah, so that's that's maybe a different conversation. But yeah, so I found it really interesting because I was like, wait, what do you mean? And then I followed. I mean, I feel being researchers, being academics, we do that because we do like learning. And I was like, wait, now I want to learn. And all of a sudden I'm reading these like research papers from like 2007 on like the search for pottery, or they found it here and they haven't. I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to learn more. But I've had experts and people like the discovery of the Egyptian mummy of the girl who was found to have the second twin in like the chest cavity, who'd
Oh
passed
God.
away. That girl. I had someone who'd worked on that, like in my Instagram DMs, being like, "Oh, hey, thank you so much for posting about this. I worked on it, and it's really amazing. Like, I saw like the scan, and we were like, oh my gosh, is that like another child?" And I was there like, "Oh, okay, great." And like the infant Neve who was found in Italy, that excavation. I've posted a few times about Jamie Hodgkins and that. And apparently one of the videos I did, I got DM'd from someone in the department who was like, "Oh yeah, we were all watching the video, and like the kid that was the baby is a really adorable child now," which I'm like, of course, all small children are adorable. But I'm there like, oh my gosh, wait, what do you mean like a department's looking at the video?
I mean, that it is, because we think of it as as a little bubble, but it is,
Mm,
people are, and they pretend not to. It's like there's something weird about TikTok that people think it's like dirty or wrong, but they are all watching. You know, it's like that. It's like I never look at the Daily Mail, you know, but they do. You know, it's that kind of like
yeah.
almost admit it by accident. But yeah, I think people do appreciate that, and so you know, I can afford to piss people off more perhaps than you can, but the thing is, I'm not going out of my way to have a go at any individual scholar
Mm,
or researcher, but I think it's important that if we do have reservations about research or criticisms of the way it's being presented, or some aspect of, you know, we should share those views. And I
mm,
was actually quite a bit shocked when recently quite a few mutuals admitted to me just how much they appreciate the fact that I corrected them on something. And you know, and I don't even know I did that. And oh yeah, that was about 2021. But you know, they're not holding a grudge against me for that. That they see that as a positive thing, that we
mm,
can't constantly be shouting at each other, but occasionally if we're disagreeing with things that are happening in the world of archaeology, we should
yeah.
give our views on these things. And you know, my views change, but I think that should be part of the, as well as, you know, referencing new research. And so it's really great that they're watching.
Yeah, it is a little stressful though. I have this fear that every archaeologist out there hates me and they're like, "Oh my gosh, that girl who just cries online, she makes the industry seem so childish." And so that's my secret fear that makes me lie awake at night. But that is kind of, I mean, you know, there's obviously discussions in other niches on social media of the pressures, but I do think that there is a certain pressure, especially the fact that a lot of archaeologists on here are young academics or like early career researchers, which is why, like, when I first came across your account, I was like, it somehow validated what I was doing. I was like, oh my gosh, there's sort of, you know, an older, more established academic. I said older, you know, older, but you know, more established, someone, you know,
No,
someone
it's
who's, I
fair
guess,
enough.
part of what some people would call big archaeology.
Big
Um,
archaeology. Yes,
big
I need to do a
archaeology.
video on this. Big archaeology. Yeah.
Yeah, big archaeology. But you know, and it was really good, especially during lockdown when I was in Australia and I wasn't really engaging with any archaeology. You know, I was just in Australia. But it was a way I felt for like networking, especially during that time when they did become other academics, like not just yourself, but other people from the
Yes.
US. And it felt like we had a little community in that way created online. And I was like, oh, okay, like maybe this is something that I'm doing.
Yes.
What it is, who knows, but maybe it is something.
May I then turn to the perhaps obvious but final section of
Mm,
discussing your social media connections with mortuary archaeology, which is obviously the bone talk, sort of John's bones dimension. And I know you've addressed this many times, and perhaps you
yeah.
don't want to, you know, I respect the fact you perhaps are a bit sick and tired of it, but I think it's I think a dimension where it, you know, you've done the short, you do short snappy videos that are about performance, but you are more than capable of speaking clearly, articulate messages in response to other creators, are crossing various ethical lines, and this is a case study of that. And I'd love to hear
Yeah.
your perspective now on that viral phenomenon of calling out and challenging people who are selling human remains online.
That was insane. That was the first time because that was before I'd started my masters. That was yeah, because I that was in August of 21. Like it was like the something like the 11th of August 2021, literally right before going to bed. I think I'm wearing my pajamas in the video. I was because I'd had a DM from an account from a follower who'd been like, "Hey, can you check out this account, John's Bones? I get a weird vibe from it." And I was like, "Oh yeah, sure." Like I think I'd seen his account previously and been like, "Oh yeah, it's kind of quirky, I guess, what he's going on," but I never looked into it deeply.
Me
It had just
too.
come
I
up.
must admit, I shunned away from it because I thought, sorry to interrupt, I was just thinking there are lots of these cases where people tell me about things and I go, yeah, that's horrible, and my brain can't, can't compute. Let's just walk away. And I feel really cowardly, but sometimes I just can't face it. Yeah, but well done for doing.
No, look, there's a reason. There's the saying, discretion is the better part of valor. Sometimes that is there's a reason that exists. But I mean, I was just looking through the account and I was like, oh yeah, it's a regular bone seller. But I was like, okay, he seems to know his legal stuff. Like he was very clear on his account and on his website. I was going through the bones they were selling. I was like, do I morally object to this? Sure. And I was like, okay, I guess I can make a video being like, oh yeah, maybe this is something people don't know. It's technically legal to sell human remains. Not super ethical, but you can't really do anything about it. And then I came across that skull. I came across the Sami skull. And I just randomly, because, you watch random YouTube videos, and I had heard of the Sami as being they're like the only recognized indigenous group in Europe, I believe. So it had come up in that context, like, oh, look at this community. And I was like, oh, wow. And so I'm going to remember that. And then I looked at it and I went, hold up. But and also the fact it was marked with a slur as well. They didn't have it registered as like a Sami. It was the slur for the. Yeah. And I just went, and I remember being like, oh, I'm going to take a picture of this because I wonder if he'll delete it. And so I made a video going, like, I don't know, I'm a bit ridiculous. I do this stupid laugh at the beginning or whatever, because I was going to try a new style of video or something. And yeah, I literally posted it and went, this is not right, because obviously in the US they have, is it NAGPRA, that protects indigenous remains, but because the Sami aren't North American indigenous, it doesn't matter what you can do. And I went, there's no way indigenous skulls don't end up in anyone's collections ethically. And I learnt after posting this that often Sami graves would be robbed essentially for researchers at the universities in some of in the countries where they're found, to determine basically that they were subhuman. And I actually did have someone come into my DMs and be like, I'm Sami and we had to fight to get my grandmother's remains returned to us because she was being studied to prove that she wasn't white. She wasn't as good, which made me go, oh, this is a lot more serious. But I posted this video thinking nothing of it because I didn't have a big account. I had something like, I don't know, 30,000 followers, which for TikTok or social media is not a lot really in the grand scheme of things. And that original video only got like 6,000 likes. And I didn't know what was happening, but other people were posting about it. And then it got onto Twitter, and I wasn't on Twitter at the time. I mean, I'm barely on now. And all of a sudden I had friends on Facebook posting about this account, and I was there like, wait, what? Like, what's happening? And then all of a sudden it was like, even though I'd started this storm, I somehow was completely removed from it. Because because if you don't get tagged in videos, like, I don't know what's being posted. And because people saw this and they were talking, and I had no idea. I'm just going about my day. And then all of a sudden I'm like, wait, what? Like, friends on Facebook are talking about it. Yeah. Like, I'm seeing so much, I'm seeing celebrities comment on it. And I'm like, what is happening right now? And then, of course, I mean, I should say that then opened me to a wide range of Sami creators, and I've learned so much about that. Like, because then I was like, oh, I posted a video, and then I had people commenting, and I was like, oh, I want to do follow-ups, like, I want to research. And then I found out how truly unethical John's Bones was, because the only anthropologist they had who was identifying the bones lived in one of the states where you can't send human remains into in the US. So they were identifying human remains from photos alone. They only had their bachelor's, and I had someone who had actually studied the bachelor's with them and did the same course and was like, yeah, like we learned broadly how to identify human remains, but it's like it's in your master's where you get the more that the specialization, like, and something, and like as someone who has excavated bones, the more you work with them, the better you get. It is one of those things that you have to practice. You can't just get 1 degree and be like, oh, that's it, I'm a bones expert. Like, no, you need the experience. That's just how it is with a lot of things, you know, practice makes perfect. So yeah, I thought that was, and so it kind of opened up this whole discussion, not just in archaeologists, but it definitely went mainstream. And that kind of made me sit back and go, hang on, this is serious. This isn't just, oh, I've posted a video 5 minutes before rolling over in bed and going to sleep. This has had an impact because I've got Indigenous people talking about, you know, some of the deep trauma that they've suffered, you know, still like someone's grandmother that they had. I was like horrified, you know, and then some people being like, you can do what you want. And then it kind of, in my mind, opened the discussion of, especially with the amount of people who went, oh, they're dead, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, we can do what we want. I went, oh, so you are saying we can buy and sell human remains and that's fine. How fresh of the human remains, like, are you saying we can buy and sell? Does it even matter if an individual has passed? Like what is that, where does that line happen? It was very interesting seeing people's discussions almost, and it was bizarre to realize. I was like, hang on, are you guys justifying slavery to me, right? Like, is this what's happening right now? Like, actually, I'm like, because change it to not talking about some bones, change it to talking about an actual person. And that's, I feel, what I try and do with my content is be like, it's not just a pile of bones. That was a person. That was someone who had a fully realized life and was surrounded by people who loved and hated them and were apathetic towards them. They were a complete person. Because it's, and this leads into my wider fears that I'm noticing about the way we, like, almost the dead are dehumanized. That the minute you're dead, you're somehow not a human. You no longer have the rights of a human in some ways. And how I feel that possibly archaeologists and museums, by displaying human remains, lend itself to that dehumanization sometimes. And I feel like, yeah, it becomes part of this much wider discussion.
Yes, I mean, we can't bracket off the trade in human remains. While it is morally and ethically repugnant, we can't pretend it sits in a vacuum in which archaeologists are not complicit. In the same way as you can have various archaeologists whining about, and rightly whining, about pseudo-archaeology being white supremacist, and you cannot then have the cognitive dissonance of pretending that the archaeological discipline doesn't perpetuate this colonial, imperial, nationalistic, racialized past. I mean, we try our best to deconstruct that, but I'm not meaning me. I'm saying, but we cannot, just denounce and see it's everyone else's problem but us. We've got to see our own complicity as a discipline, not as individuals necessarily, but in the legacy of those processes. And so the conversation's broader, and also about mortality, because I bet that even while there is obviously the people who just want to be seen to be leaving an idiotic comment and they don't care, there will be people who are leaving imbecilic or ill-considered points, and their point to you may be dumb, but perhaps it's making them think in a few months' time, when they have a personal bereavement or they have to encounter something, it'll make them think again. And so I'm trying to be hopeful for once, because I tend to be a bit dismal and negative when I see these pile-ons and horrible comments. I do think that at least some of them, it's making them think, and while I do block a lot of people who leave really ridiculously obnoxious comments, whether it's because that's what they believe or just what they think it would be edgy, there are a lot of people, I think, who are just trying to find their way into a topic they've never addressed before. And there's the issues with John's bones, but there's also the broader conversation, which has so many different angles to it, which I think is really beneficial with that kind of viral, phenomenon. But I hadn't really quite realized, because even when I've gone kind of viral in a small way, it's always been on TikTok. It's never spilled out that way. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic I haven't experienced myself, is that people coming from Facebook and saying, "Oh, you're being talked about here," or
yeah, I can't even quite remember how I realized how it happened. I feel like maybe another video came across my For You page or something talking about it, and I was like, oh, why are other people talking about John's bones? And then I think I had someone that was like, and then people who'd seen my content, I think I had a few people being like, oh, it's being talked about on Twitter. And I think maybe that was when I made a Twitter account just so I could like have a little sticky beak over. I was like, wait, what are people saying? What is happening over here? But it is very odd because I mean it's the one and only time I think something has gone actually mainstream. Like yes, there's been trends, but this was something very I don't know how to necessarily categorize it, but it was something quite different because it did eventually, I mean, there was an academic paper published with, people who studied this and went, what was this phenomena? What happened? Not studying it from the what's necessarily the discussion, but purely the way that TikTok as a platform reacted to this knowledge, kind of from that perspective, which I thought was very interesting. It was quite bizarre in some ways to read an almost dissection of something you'd started unintentionally and hadn't thought about, and it being like, oh, these are graphs and these are words that relate to each other and these are connections and stuff, and then the different styles of videos. I thought that was, and it was also that made me go, oh, hang on, if what we're doing, and I say we because I feel like it's a community here. It's not, I don't exist in a vacuum.
No.
There are many other people around. There are many other creators who created, great content focusing sometimes in their specific niches, but talking about this topic, something that we've done is important enough that it's worthy of a published paper, then we must be doing something more than, oh, TikTok's just teenagers dancing. Yeah. Which I might add, TikTok dances are very hard to do as someone who's attempted to do them. So I tip my hat to any teenagers who are able to dance well on TikTok. I'm like, that's a skill. I'm not here to poo-poo that. No. I wish I could dance.
No. And it's about reaching different audiences who would otherwise never even engage with this topic and never know about it. And you can't engineer that kind of attention, and you can't contrive it, because people accuse anybody that has a popular video, oh, you're deliberately baiting, you're deliberately contriving. But these things are difficult to predict. But they are not unique. You can't predict when and which video, but there are ways in which speaking honestly and responsibly on issues that matter, is going to be of broader significance, on a global English speaking and non-English speaking world, that people are going to pick up on this. Do you feel, or is that a fair thing to say?
I think it is. I certainly think that, I get accused all the time of, oh, you're doing this for attention, you're doing this for this. And I'm like, well, I'm doing it for attention in the sense that I want people to watch my content. I'm not doing it for some kind of validation. Like, it's not, most of the work I'm doing, well, 99% of this is for free, has been for free historically. Any money I've earned has been, minimal or by accident, because, you can comment on the platform and the algorithm, like, even for the amount of followers I have, I sometimes struggle to even get 10,000 views on a video. Like, I regularly archive ones after a while if I'm like, this just hasn't gone, and like, no one's seeing this. I posted a video and after 8 hours it had like 130 views, and I was like, well, I guess I just have to take it down. Like, there's no point of it being here. No one's seeing it. Maybe I'll try and redo it later in a different style. But I think that's the thing with social media. Like, that's why there are, people whose whole careers is to try and engineer these moments, or, celebrities or, popular creators. They have teams behind them. It's often not just one person.
Yeah.
So, it's a very difficult, if you do want to engineer it, I think it is very difficult, and still, I would argue, up to a bit of luck that, that the algorithm smiles at you that day, perhaps.
Yeah. But
Definitely.
There are issues that chime with something deep about people across cultures, that when people care about human remains, and they care about the dead, and they care about bones, and they care about artifacts and places and things and their connection to people's emotions, and it's not contrived, it's